She stood in front of the judge, hands folded in her lap, eyes red from crying. Not because of the divorce. Because 6 days earlier, she had buried her mother. The funeral was small. Quiet. Just Hope and a handful of neighbors who barely knew the woman who had lived on Sycamore Lane for 22 years. Her husband didn't attend. He said he had a meeting. He lied. He was with her, the other woman, the one sitting beside him now in the courtroom, dressed in a cream-colored suit that cost more than 3 months of rent, glowing with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who believed she had already won. Victor stood up when his lawyer nodded. He looked at his wife, at Hope, and said the words slowly, deliberately, like he wanted her to feel every syllable. "Your Honor, I married a woman with nothing. And she is leaving this marriage with exactly what she brought into it. Nothing." The courtroom was silent. Hope didn't move. Didn't flinch. Her lawyer touched her arm gently, but she didn't respond. Crystal Lux leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. She had won, and she knew it. What no one in that room knew, not even Hope, was that the woman she buried 6 days ago wasn't just her mother. She was one of the wealthiest human beings to ever live. And in 72 hours, everything was about to change. Before I continue, welcome. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming stories. Thank you. Let me take you back 7 years. Victor Pride was a different man then. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe Hope just couldn't see it yet. They met at a community college where she worked part-time in a library and took night classes in accounting. He was charming, funny. He had this way of making her feel like she mattered, like she was more than just the girl who restocked shelves and made minimum wage. He told her about his dreams, a startup, a future, a life where money wouldn't be a problem anymore. She believed him. So when he asked her to marry him in the parking lot of a diner at 2 in the morning, she said yes. They didn't have much. But they had each other. Or so she thought. Hope's mother, Constance Noble, came to the wedding. She didn't say much. She never did. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes who lived a modest life in a quiet house at the edge of the city. She worked from home doing something with computers. Victor never thought twice about her. He should have. 7 years before that courtroom, Hope Miller was nobody's wife and nobody's problem. She worked the early shift at the community college library, opening the building before the sun was fully up, restocking shelves before the first students arrived, checking out books for people who never learned her name. She made minimum wage. She took night classes in accounting 3 evenings a week and ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter because she was too tired to sit down. She wasn't unhappy. She had simply accepted that this was what her life looked like. Small. Functional. Hers. Victor Pride walked in on a Tuesday in October, carrying nothing but a notepad and a confidence that didn't belong to a man with $11 in his checking account. He asked her where the business development section was. She showed him. He came back the next day and the day after that, and somewhere between the 3rd visit and the 7th, he stopped pretending to need the books. He was funny in the way that made you feel included. He remembered details. The night class she mentioned once, the sandwich she said she always ate on Thursdays. He listened like she was the most interesting person in the room, which no one had ever made her feel before. He told her about his idea, a tech platform that would change the way small businesses managed inventory. He described it with such precision, such absolute certainty, that Hope forgot to wonder whether it was real. She just believed him. That was the thing about Victor in those early days. Belief was contagious around him. She started covering his late fees. Then his textbook rentals. Then the gaps in his rent when his roommate disappeared 1 month without warning. She told herself it was love. It was, for a while. That was the cruelest part. Constance Noble never asked for much and never offered more than she thought was needed. She called Hope every Sunday at 8 in the morning, always right on time, always for exactly 20 minutes. She asked about sleep, about meals, about whether Hope was remembering to take her vitamins. She never asked about Victor's business, and she never volunteered money, and those two facts lived in the same quiet corner of her personality without any apparent contradiction. Hope loved her mother the way you love something steady. Not with fireworks. With relief. Victor loved her differently. Which is to say, he didn't. He was polite at first, the way men are polite to women they've already dismissed. He called Constance sweet, which was his word for irrelevant. He sat through the occasional Sunday dinners at her modest house on the edge of the city, the plain furniture, the outdated desktop computer humming in the corner of the spare room, the meals that were filling but never impressive, and he smiled through all of it with the patience of a man waiting for something better to arrive. When the startup hit its first serious wall and the savings account reached zero, Victor's patience ran out. He asked Hope, carefully at first and then with less care, whether Constance might help, whether she might step in. Alone, he called it. Temporary. He was certain of that. Hope asked her mother once. Just once. Constance was quiet for a long moment and then said simply that she didn't think that would be a good idea. She didn't explain. She never did. Victor never forgave her for it. He called her selfish when Constance wasn't in the room. Called her cold. Said a real mother would have done more. Hope never defended her. She wonders about that now. The startup didn't fail. That was the part nobody saw coming, least of all Hope. It took 4 years, 2 pivots, and every dollar she earned across 3 jobs to keep them afloat long enough for it to matter. The grocery store in the mornings, the library in the afternoons, the office cleaning shifts that started at 9 in the evening and left her hands raw by midnight. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself so many things during those years that she eventually stopped listening to her own voice entirely. Then the platform launched properly, the right investor noticed, and Victor Pride became exactly the man he had always described to her in that college library. Meetings in glass buildings. A wardrobe that cost more than their first year of rent combined. His name in the kind of industry newsletters that nobody reads unless they already matter. He stopped answering her calls somewhere around month 3 of the company's success. Not all at once. Gradually, the way warmth leaves a room, so slowly you don't notice until you're already cold. He had a reason every time. A dinner. A flight. A conference call that ran long. Hope logged extra hours at the grocery store and told herself he was busy, that this was what they had worked for, that the distance was temporary. Crystal Lux was not temporary. She was tall, polished, built for rooms that Hope had never been invited into. She worked in marketing and dressed like every morning was a negotiation she intended to win. Victor introduced her to colleagues as indispensable. He introduced Hope to no one. By the time Hope found the messages, there were months of them. Crystal. Always Crystal. Written with a familiarity that made it clear the affair wasn't new. What was new was how little Victor tried to hide it. Constance got sick in the autumn and didn't tell Hope until it was already serious. That was her way. She had always absorbed difficulty privately, the way she absorbed everything else, without drama, without request, without burdening the people she loved with things she believed she could manage alone. By the time Hope found out, the diagnosis was already months old and the prognosis was the kind that ends conversations. Hope quit 2 of her 3 jobs the following week and moved into her mother's house on Sycamore Lane without asking Victor's permission. She told him what was happening. He said, of course, take whatever time you need, I'll be there as soon as I can. He said it with the voice he used in meetings. Measured, convincing, already thinking about something else. He never came. There was always a reason. A product launch that couldn't be delayed. An investor dinner he couldn't reschedule. A conference in a city that always seemed to be exactly where Crystal Lux happened to be that week. Hope stopped asking after the first month. Asking had started to feel like begging, and she had learned enough by then to know the difference. Those 3 months were the quietest of her life. She learned her mother's routines, the tea at 7, the windows she liked open even in the cold, the old film she watched without sound because she said she preferred to imagine the dialogue herself. They talked more during those months than they had in years. Not about anything large. Just the daily texture of a life winding gently down. Constance never mentioned money. Never mentioned Victor. Never once said I told you so, though she had earned the right 100 times over. On the last morning, she held Hope's hand and told her she was stronger than she thought. Hope didn't believe her yet. They buried Constance Noble on a Thursday morning with no fanfare and no eulogy that did her justice. Hope stood at the graveside in the thin autumn cold and watched the casket lower and thought about the window her mother always kept open, the tea at 7, the silent films with their imagined dialogue. She thought about how a person could live 22 years on a quiet street and leave behind nothing louder than a handful of neighbors who showed up more out of habit than grief. She thought Victor might still come. He didn't. The divorce papers arrived 6 days later. A courier knocked at the door of the house on Sycamore Lane while Hope was still sleeping in her mother's bed because she hadn't been able to bring herself to leave yet. She signed without reading them. She wasn't sure she understood what was happening, only that it was happening fast, which she would later understand had been intentional. Victor's lawyer was efficient. Hers was not. The hearing was scheduled before Hope had fully processed that she needed to prepare for one. She sat at the plaintiff's table in the clothes she could find and watched Victor enter the courtroom like a man arriving at a celebration. He was groomed, composed, and flanked by Crystal Lux, who had dressed for the occasion in that cream-colored suit as though the whole proceeding were a press event she expected to enjoy. Victor's lawyer argued that Hope's contributions to the marriage were negligible, that Victor's success was self-made, that she had played no meaningful role in building what they had. Victor watched her while the words were delivered and did not look away. Then he stood and spoke the words himself. Slowly. Deliberately. Nothing. Hope sat very still and let it land. She was good at surviving things quietly. She had learned from the best. Hope was staying in a motel 3 miles from the courthouse when the phone rang. She had checked in the night after the hearing with a single bag and the kind of exhaustion that sits behind the eyes and doesn't shift with sleep. The room was clean enough. It had a window that faced a parking lot and a heater that clicked on every 20 minutes whether it was needed or not. She had been lying on top of the covers fully dressed, not sleeping, just waiting for the next thing to happen without any particular expectation of what it might be. The number was Swiss. She almost didn't answer. The man on the other end introduced himself as Andreas Keller. He spoke English with careful precision, the way people do when they have chosen every word in advance. He said he represented a private investment group headquartered in Zurich. He said he was calling regarding the estate of Constance Noble. He asked if she was sitting down. Hope said she was lying down. He said that would do. What followed was 20 minutes that rearranged every assumption she had ever held about her own life. Andreas Keller spoke in the calm, methodical tone of a man delivering information he had delivered before, though he acknowledged, gently, that the scale of this particular disclosure was unusual even by his firm's standards. Constance Noble had not worked from home doing something with computers. She had built, over the course of 4 decades, a private financial empire spanning 11 countries. She had started with nothing, his words, and had accumulated, through a series of holding companies and investment vehicles deliberately kept out of the public eye, a fortune valued at $1.7 trillion. Hope was silent for a long time. Andreas Keller waited. He was clearly accustomed to waiting. Finally she asked one question. Why had her mother never said anything? He paused. Then he said, "She wanted to make sure you were loved for the right reasons." Hope checked out of the motel the following morning and flew to Zurich 3 days later. She brought one carry-on bag, which Andreas Keller's assistant would later replace entirely with a wardrobe that Hope had no hand in selecting and no objection to wearing. She had expected to feel overwhelmed. She did, briefly, during the first elevator ride up to the 43rd floor of the firm's headquarters, watching the city fall away beneath her and thinking about the woman who had built all of this from nothing while eating simple dinners in a modest house and keeping her window open in the cold. Then the elevator doors opened and something shifted in her quietly. The next 8 weeks were unlike anything she had language for. Andreas Keller and his team were patient, thorough, and notably unsurprised by how quickly she absorbed what they showed her. The accounting nights classes helped. So did 4 years of managing 3 jobs simultaneously while another person spent the money. It turned out that running a household on almost nothing was not entirely unlike understanding how capital moved through a system. You learned where the pressure points were. You learned what to watch. By the 6th week she had stopped asking permission to form opinions in the meetings. By the 8th she was running them. It was Andreas who suggested going public with her new role. A woman who inherited a $1 trillion empire was a story the financial press would consume for months. Hope considered it for exactly one evening. She told him she wanted to stay invisible. For now. He asked how long. She thought about Victor's face in that courtroom. The deliberate slowness of his cruelty. Crystal Lux crossing her legs in that cream-colored suit. The courier at the door of her mother's house 6 days after the funeral. Long enough, she said. Victor's empire, it turned out, was less stable than his wardrobe suggested. The cracks had started forming quietly. A key contract lost, a product launch that missed badly, 3 senior engineers who left within the same month and took institutional knowledge with them on the way out. By the time the financial press noticed, the damage was already structural. The investors who had celebrated Victor Pride 18 months earlier were now returning his calls with the particular slowness of people who had already made their decision. He needed a bailout. He needed it quickly. And through a chain of introductions that Hope had done nothing to arrange and everything to enable, he found himself on a flight to Geneva to pitch to a private investment group he knew only as the Harrington Advisory Group. Hope was already in the room when he arrived. She was sitting at the head of the table in a tailored navy suit, hair pulled back, no jewelry except a simple watch. She looked like someone who had been running boardrooms for decades. Victor looked at her and threw her in the same instant, the way he always had, and took his seat across from a woman he had last seen frozen in a courtroom being told she was worth nothing. He presented for 40 minutes. The numbers were weak and the confidence was performance, and everyone in the room understood both of those things except Victor, who had always confused the two. When he finished, Hope looked at him for a long moment. Then she told him, calmly and without theater, that the group would be acquiring his company at the offered valuation. That the acquisition would include a full leadership transition. That his services would not be retained. Victor's face went white. She thanked him for his time with the same measured courtesy Andreas Keller had once extended to her in a motel room 3 miles from a courthouse. Crystal Lux was gone before the acquisition was finalized. There was no dramatic exit, no confrontation, no parting words that might have given Victor something to hold on to. She simply stopped returning his calls with the clean efficiency of a woman who had always known the difference between a man and an investment. Victor had been the latter, and the returns had collapsed, and Crystal operated on principles that left no room for sentiment when the numbers stopped working. He tried to reach Hope once. A single message, carefully worded, that managed to be both an apology and a negotiation simultaneously. She read it in the back of a car on the way to a board meeting and didn't respond. There was nothing in it that required one. She heard through Andreas that Victor had moved into a smaller apartment on the edge of the city. That he had taken a consulting role with a firm that was too polite to turn him away entirely. That he told people he was transitioning, which was the word men like Victor used when the life they had constructed around their own reflection finally ran out of surface. Hope didn't follow the updates for long. She had other things to do. The philanthropic foundation took shape over the following year. Quietly, the way Constance had done everything. Education grants in 11 countries. Funding for women rebuilding after financial abuse. A library wing at the community college where a girl had once restocked shelves for minimum wage and believed in the wrong person and survived it anyway. On the afternoon the foundation was formally announced, Hope drove to Sycamore Lane and sat at her mother's grave until the light changed. She didn't say much. She never needed to with Constance. She just wanted her to know that the silence had not been surrender. That it had been patience. That it had been enough. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. It means more than you know. If Hope's story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is carrying more than they're showing. Someone who has been told they don't matter by a person who is never qualified to make that judgment. And if that person is you, hold on. Constance Noble started with nothing and changed the world without anyone knowing her name. So can you. See you in the next one.